Look at that. Timed with the music. Say hello, Pseudo. How are we doing this evening?
Apparently, we're having internet connection issues, so I may sound a little bit like a robot occasionally. So I do apologize. However, if people really want, I can actually break out when I get like that and sound a little bit like Gladys and start telling people how disappointed I am at their inability to complete such a simple challenge.
But of course, the downside of that is you will be broken into little pieces and placed in a fire. And that would be bad.
Why would I do something like that?
I'm just following along with the lyrics of the Portal song.
I'm just going to keep my mouth shut because you have not played Portal yet, have you?
I have. I've completed both of them.
Have you? Even the multiplayer mode?
Yes. Quite fantastic.
Really?
A lot of fun was had by all.
Did you enjoy taking your friend's head and spinning it around?
I don't remember the friend's head spinning it around thing. Which bit was that? Does that fit into innovation?
It is
Actually,
innovative
Portal
because
does.
it really does. But when it comes down to things such as hanging out with friends and doing things, yes, it is innovative to be able to take their heads out of their bodies, spin them around, and then shove it back in.
Something like that. Ah, you're talking about the emote, aren't you? I've suddenly twigged what the reference is. I don't
Very
do
good.
emotes, I just solve puzzles. I ignore the emotes.
Yes, it shows.
Never mind. So, hello to those of you in MMO Buffland. Yes, we are, obviously, as some of you might know, frantically leveling in an MMO at the moment, as betwixt our title. However, we're taking a pause from that to bring you some new and shiny content. To answer these straight-up questions, we're not quite 50 yet, but we're not doing too badly, I don't think. We'll certainly be there this week and can start the prepping, but we'll talk about that on Friday, because it's not quite the right show for it. Pseudo, what have we got on the menu today?
We have roast potatoes, roast turkey, and a variety of little tidbits, including a suggestion that was sent in last week. For those of you who remember, last week's show was about patches and whether they were good or bad and why they evoke such intense emotional reactions from players. And of course, as a developer, we offer some tips to how to mitigate dealing with loss aversion that can sometimes be dealt with by the players. One of the key things that we're going to be doing is continuing that topic because we asked last week, guys, get us a topic. Those who watched live had the chance to send in a topic via voice at MMOBuff.TV. We selected one of those topics and basically MMOBuffized it. I think that's a word. Is that a word? It is now.
MMOBuffization? I don't know.
Buffization? But we buffed it, basically. And we turned it into this topic. So to SM, who sent us the question, you'll be getting an email from me at the end of the show asking for your address so that I can send you a Swagzilla swag pack.
Wonderful, and I'm sure there'll be interesting things in it. So, we've looked at the bits and pieces that were sent in, and we've come up with the topic MMOs and the risk of innovation. And it's based around a very simple premise, and that is that the community of game players say, we want innovation, we want new stuffs, we want all the shinies. Yet, sales numbers don't always reflect that, and player attitudes don't always reflect it when you give them something new and shiny. You give someone something new and shiny, and half the time they say, but I don't like it like this. I like it the other way. Is there a bit of loss aversion creeping back in, I wonder? So we're going to walk our way through that and look at some innovation, but also at another thing that's very relevant here, which is iteration. And where do you draw the line? What is the difference? And what do you want in a game? So I guess that's the start point. That is the question. As an MMO player, what should you want in a game?
Ooh. Now that is a really, really bad way to phrase that question because what you're implying is that they have to have a specific thing that they should want in an MMO. And the reality is wants and needs from players are diverse. They're as diverse as the different flavors of coffee out there. Some like decaf, some don't. Some want the mocha latte, some don't want caramel. Some want triple
like
espressos.
decaf?
Some do. Not everybody is like you.
I suppose that is a good thing.
Well, it is. I mean, think about it. What makes an MMO an MMO? This is something we've discussed in a previous show before. MMOs need to have some kind of fixed world environment that can modify and change, sort of like the Living Story and the World Story does for Guild Wars 2 and WildStar. But at the same time, it needs to have multiplayer action. Just because you're able to get 8 friends logged in does not make something an MMO. We're talking massively multiplayer online environments where people can hang out. Now, what ends up happening in an environment like that? You end up, based upon the various styles of MMOs, having games either fully geared towards PvP, PvE, trying to mix it up, and that's just only one thing that players are looking for in a game. Then you've got some who have various classes, or you can build your tank this way, or you could build your plane this way, because yes, there are actually plane-based MMOs. So it's a matter of what makes the MMO an MMO, what are people looking for to play, and why do we always hear things such as, that's just an EverQuest clone, that's just a WoW clone. Where's the innovation? What makes it special? And yet, if someone does bring about something really, really unique, as we've said, numbers don't always reflect the desire for it. And then again, look at World of Warcraft. World of Warcraft has been around for how long now, Mizpah?
Oh, 2005 late, I do believe you could first log in live.
So it's been around since 2005, and it's gone through various iterations and changes and innovations in its own right. And still people go back to it. It's one of those default go-tos. I've tried all these other games. I've tried City of Villains and Heroes. I've tried Champs. I've tried EverQuest. I've tried ESO. I've tried pick an online MMO, and I've tried it. And then some people go, screw it, I'm just going to go back to WoW.
And of course, it's worth thinking before we get into sort of iteration versus innovation, is there have to be some constants. And indeed there are, because you've got these shared building blocks that pretty much all these games have. You know, if you're not going to have one of these building blocks, then you really are dealing with innovation. But to do that, you're increasing risk. So, you know, most games, you're going to move with WASD. Yes, you can mouse turn, you can run, you can turn lock, all that things, but you still have this core movement centered around mouse and keyboard. Pretty much everything has levels and classes. I say pretty much, there's some exceptions we'll get to in a minute. I phrased that one carefully, so stop champing at the bit quite yet. But it's another one of those core building blocks. And then you have core tenets that sit within games. Typically, there is the adventuring style of content. There is the small group and the large group style of content. Call them dungeons, call them raids, call them flibbity-flobbity wibble-wobbles. It doesn't really matter. It's the same idea of I'm going to get a group of a certain size and go do stuff. And I'm actually not quite sure what the player reaction would be if you take all these things away. And with that becomes an interesting dynamic. MMOs are not cheap to produce. Far from it. They are long-term, costly endeavours. And if you're going to innovate, you're going to take on risk. And there's going to be a cut-off point. And you can almost draw an inverse relationship between cost and risk. Because if you're going to do something that costs £500 to do and takes you a couple of weeks, you can take some pretty big risks. If it doesn't work out, you can just go again with another one. I can only ever think of one MMO that's had the opportunity to start again. And that was based on one of the largest worldwide MMO franchises. Not everyone is Final Fantasy. So if you're developing an MMO and you get it horribly wrong, chances are it's just going to go the way of the MMO dodo. So do you want MMOs to be truly innovative? Or do we actually just want to see iterations and the odd new idea thrown into the field? I mean, if we don't provide some innovation or iteration, the line maybe gets blurred, then all we're going to be doing is playing the same game with different pixels, different character names, different story arcs, but I'm still going to go to something, I'm going to select it, I'm going to hit buttons and do a damage rotation, I'm going to kill it, I'm going to collect 10 rats, I'm going to go back to Bob and hand them in. And if you these days log into a new game, and unless it's tongue-in-cheek humour, which I would appreciate, if your first quest is kill 10 rats, you're not always going to get a very good reaction to it. So I'm going to postulate a statement. And my statement is going to be this. MMOs, at their size, scale, budget, and consumer expectations, can only ever afford to innovate in one or two areas, and every other area they are forced to iterate. If you stay within those parameters, you have the potential to deliver on expectations.
Okay, well, first thing I want to do is, for everybody who happens to be watching, do me a favor. Let us know in chat, do you want innovation, or do you want just sort of the same old, just maybe with a different storyline or something? Because, in all honesty, we can say one thing and want something else, or need something else, but I want to ask. Now, I can understand your particular postulation. And in fact, I can agree with it to a point. Because in all honesty, you do have the skeletal framework that makes an MMO an MMO. It may not necessarily be levels, but you do collect experience points. In fact, I don't know of a single MMO out there that doesn't do with experience. What you do with that experience varies from MMO to MMO, but it is, in the end, you're still collecting experience points. Now, for example, let's take The Secret World. Have you played The Secret World, Mizpah?
No, I haven't.
Okay. The Secret
I know
World
it reasonably well, but I haven't played hands-on.
The Secret World takes experience, and it does two things. You build SP, which is your skill points, and you build AP, which is your ability points. You don't have a level in that game at all. There is no level. So I can't turn around to someone and go, I'm level 50, you're level 25, la, 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 la. It doesn't work like that. The way it works is you pick how you want to place your points within the skills and within the abilities. And that actually shapes and molds and turns every character into something unique. Yes, if you play long enough and for enough period of time, you can have all the points in all of the places, and then you can mix up your builds how you want because they use Elast the way WildStar does. You can mix all that kind of stuff up, but it takes time, it takes effort, it takes playtime. But there is no, I'm a level 10, I'm a level 12 kind of thing. But you still use points. You still earn points.
But every time as we discuss systems here, let's pigeonhole them. I'm going to argue off bat that is going to simply be iteration. At this point, that is not necessarily innovation. It's at the top end of innovation, but look at things like the skill point distribution in EVE. It already exists. Someone's taken a concept, they've built on it by saying rather than have one metric, we'll have two metrics and you choose what you do. But in DDO, you have the ability to design out your builds. In the upcoming Pathfinder, you've got the ability to distribute points in roles and bits and pieces. So is that truly what they're doing with levels? Is it truly innovative, or is it just iteration on what's been there before? And I'm sure a Google search would give me other games with no levels.
Well, see, that's the thing. In that particular case, it's still an iteration. As I said, you're still gaining experience. That's a core fundamental skeletal rib cage, so to speak, for an MMO. If you do not have character development, and character development in an MMO is through experience, and like I said, it's how you spend it can vary, but in the end, that's a core rudimental structure. Period.
Yes, I mean, if someone came up with an MMO where progression was tied to actions in a looser way or a different way that felt meaningful, yes, that would be innovative. But it strikes me as being, at the very least, a psychological imperative that to some degree you get benefit from making smart choices, you get benefit from increasing effort or work, which in a game sense equates to time and success and/or success. Very difficult to imagine something systemic that is more loosely coupled with those things.
Fair enough. So that's one skeletal piece. Let's take another. Let's take story. I don't know a single MMO that doesn't have some kind of story to back it up. Makes a difference whether the story is we're all fighters in World War II fighting something, or whether we're in this strange fantasy universe where orcs and goblins roam free, or we all can cast fireballs, magic missiles, pew pew. It makes it. There is something story-wise in place. Now, I think the only time I've seen something relatively innovative, not iterative, is how questing is done, how story is delivered to the individual. The first real eye-opening experience was Tor. I People can argue all they want, but that was the first game where you had a choice where you did get a different ending than somebody else who made different choices. And that, to me, showed an innovative way of delivering story content.
There were several bits of innovation there with story in SW Tour. They didn't necessarily fulfill, I feel, the promises they made as you leveled across the board. That first mission where you chose which route you went, and you either defended the ship against the attack and ran through the corridor, or you went scouting off across the landing bay and attacked the other ship. A really good example. But I found that level of divergence in choice and alternate outcomes, that bar they set early wasn't maintained.
I
Whether
agree
that's
with
development time and the urge to get it out the door, I don't know. But at that point, I thought, well, if this expands from here and your choices get more meaningful, the game's in a good place. But sadly,
we
that
might
fifth
want
pillar thing they didn't quite manage.
Yeah, unfortunately, but there was an innovation there. And I think Aussie is making a really good point here. And God, by the way, Gothic Slicer, loving your comments as well. But he's made a point of saying innovation to him is. Now, I think what we really need to do is we need to define innovation and we need to define iteration. Because if you want to be really, really technical, there is no such thing as something brand new. There isn't. Everything is built off, influenced, or inspired by something else. Therefore, it's all an iteration. It's an irritation. It's an iteration of something that has come before. So, for example, the only real innovation in MMOs that we've had is that MMOs were created. You have the ability to get together with millions of other people in an online world with pixelated people and do stuff. You know, one could argue that. So before we do that, let's actually define.
Okay. So there's actually something interesting about these terms, and there's a name for it which eludes me at the moment. There's a handful of them in various dictionaries where the two terms have circular references. It becomes impossible to define one concept without relation to the other. And I can't think of what that's called, but it's just occurred to me. This is one of those examples.
Yes.
So I shall be Googling, if not for the key presses on the mic, so someone will have to look that one up for me. What is it called when one term A relies on the definition of term B to describe itself, and vice versa? But here we go. If we speak to Monsieur Oxford English Dictionary, he will tell us that innovation is the action of iterating or repeating on, or the process of being iterated. Okay, great. So I am doing stuff if I am doing stuff. Yeah, not very helpful. Let's try it in plain English, shall we? What is iteration? So I built a shelf, and the shelf, I put some books on it, and it fell off. And that's because my shelf wasn't very well built. So I looked at how I built it, and I realized that if I kind of put an angular piece down to the wall, it will support more load. So I took my design of my shelf, I put it back on the wall, I added 2 extra bits of wood, I stuck my books on it, success. Shelf version 2 successfully held my books. Now, if I wanted
Until it moved, and things started falling off the side.
At which point I look again and I go to shelf version 3 with built-in bookends. And that's an example of iteration as my shelf continues to evolve. Shelf version 47 probably has got a keypad, a check-in, check-out process, an automatic way of putting my books in alphabetical order or via the Dewey Decimal
Remembering what
System.
page you're on.
And the ability to automatically have whatever book I haven't yet bought on the shelf ready for me just about 2 minutes before I decide to read it. Kind of a useful shelf. But you're never going to build one of those day one. And you're never going to build the sorts of MMO we're used to playing today without the experiences of all of the various predecessors. And this is where the...
Well, this is the problem. Would you say then that the concept of putting something on the wall to store your books was the innovation? Everything else was the iteration?
I think you've got to look at the scope of the change. So, as I add more things to my shelf, does it enable choices that previously were unavailable to me? So that's one way of looking at it. If the shelf, all of a sudden my shelf is such that I can sit on it, my shelf now performs a new function. This analogy is getting really stretched now. But it provides a new function that it didn't provide before. If my shelf now acts as a security mechanism and doesn't allow undesirable people to borrow my books and not return them, that's probably more of an innovation because it's adding new traits, functions, and features. And we can see this in games where new stuff comes into play. Somewhere along the line, someone decided that an arena would be a smart thing where two people can enter into gladiatorial combat without the outside influence of the rest of the MMO world. Now, I actually can't tell you top of my head where that first appeared. I'm almost tempted to say it would be something like the early Arena in Anarchy Online, but I'm not entirely sure of that. But at some point, there was MMO, there was PvE, there was PvP, and the first time someone came up with an arena concept, I would call that innovation. It enabled something new in a controlled environment that wasn't there before. Now, you could argue it iterated on two people meeting outside the castle and butting heads.
You could also iterate it on the fact that it is on the concept that pretty much most games in today's day and age, starting from, Go Fish, are two people fighting against each other in some kind of dueling methodology. So therefore, why wouldn't that be iterated into another game? Notice the choice of words.
One thing that's really key to see, where we do see either substantial iteration or innovation in MMOs, it's immediately available to the rest of the stable of games producers and developers, because the problems we're solving in MMOs are frequently not technological, he says, trying not to choke. There are massive tech issues with an MMO, don't get me wrong, but it isn't very often that tech is the limiting factor on a game system, as long as the system was around during the creation of the game. Trying to bolt something new into an engine, tricky, don't always want to go there. However, if you have a design in mind, you can pretty much solve that problem if you design the engine in the first place. So, to come up with innovation, what we actually need is ideas. And all ideas have to be based on something.
That's the problem. I mean, when it comes to innovation, when it comes to something new, I think you have to break it down into parts like we were doing before. You have the various different things that quantify a game as a game, that define a genre as a genre. FPSs have a certain quality to them. Sandboxes have a certain thing to them. You also have different things coming to you from theme parks, etc. I mean, each thing has its own definition. The innovation is very difficult to find. We see more iteration than we do innovation. If we saw something brand new, so let's take, for example, this isn't going to work quite as well as the way I want to take it, but we'll go with it for now. You have WildStar. WildStar has a very certain art style to it. Now, for some people, the innovation is artwork and the way that artwork is used. Or it's that, for example, they use telegraphs. Guild Wars 2 also has a very similar telegraph kind of example. There were telegraphs in other games as well. But bringing in telegraphs and making them such a huge part is slightly innovative, especially the way that they've chosen to use those telegraphs. Because, for those of you who haven't seen it, that innovation is no longer you have a boss fight. The innovation is you fight the room. The room will kill you. Eggs be damned. Just gonna say that right now. Eggs be damned. But you're fighting against a concept. Instead of that whole same old, we're going to do trash mobs, we're going to do boss mobs. The innovation is what they've done with something that's already there. That's not an iteration to me. To me, they've taken something that is relatively familiar. Stay out of the fire, watch out for the red stuff, blah, blah, blah. And they've twisted it to make it much more advanced. Okay. So to me, I would almost say that's an innovation.
Well, let's look at a number of things then. Let's look for some more examples from the channel. And let's see if we can pick apart where is innovation.
Oh, I just want to point out
iteration.
That was not my phone. So do not think that ding was my phone. That ding belongs to that man over there.
I thought that was just because you leveled. No? Okay.
You can try all you want, mister, but it ain't going to happen, because let me tell you something. No. Okay?
This is why I'm so glad you're currently in the remote studio several miles away, Pseudo. But anyway, moving back to the knitting.
Yes.
Let's come up with a few ideas. Okay. SW Tour. Something so simple. They removed auto attack.
Yes. Yes, they did.
Now, they took a very tried and trusted tab target 1-2-3 style of combat, and they changed it. They changed the feel of it dramatically because you had nothing happening automatically in the background. Everything you did, you had to make a choice, which allowed them to do things with the animations and bits and pieces. And you can argue how well or didn't work from a competitive standpoint, but there was a certain visceral feel to combat in that game. Now, with what they've done with combat, was it iteration or innovation?
What they did was actually unique to a degree. They did the same thing that a lot of other MMOs have done, which means they gave people classes. However, depending upon what side you played, your class name changed. Even though you had the exact same ability stats, the abilities were named different. So when it came to the combat side of things, it made no difference whether you were a Sith Inquisitor or some Jedi noob. No offense, I'm a Sith. Suck it up. But, whether you happen to be that or the other one on the quote-unquote other side, losers, it was exactly the same. You just had different names for it. That was an interesting concept because it allowed for personal identification of the fact that, I am this within this universe. And that actually kind of works out a little bit because instead of having 16 different classes that they have to work through because you have multiple specs with the different classes, etc., you nailed it down and it made it easier. So when you made an impact on one, it affected both sides. Because I still remember the huge problems back in WoW when you didn't have paladins on both sides and you didn't have shamans on both sides. And there were some serious issues with that.
And there were. Yet one of the things I disliked about SW Tour was that mirror effect. I actually particularly love, and a better example is going to be EverQuest, even EverQuest 2, where you have a vast set of characters to actually choose from, and they're not all aligned to the same factions. So if you want to be an X, you're going to be Kinos. If you want to be a Y, you're going to be Freeport. And the fact, you walk around, there's more identity. There are some shared classes. And I would actually say that although it gave them flex in terms of development decisions, and it made their lives easier, it put things into more of a microcosm, it actually detracts something to me. And most games since, up to and including WildStar, haven't really managed that wider feel.
See, this is where I disagree with you, because this goes back to what we were talking about before. If you're going to make some kind of change to a fundamental system of gameplay, game style, story, whatever, and your MMO, you have to take that moment and put your focus on making that the best that it can be, which means developer time is going to have to be cut because what you're doing is placing risk on this new concept, this new idea. So in the case of Tor, what we've come up with is in order for us to bring to you the ability to have cutscenes, vocalized story progression, the ability to have different things occur, and regardless if you were playing the same thing as somebody else, you could have a completely different story path outcome because of your choices that you made. That kind of innovative storytelling style within an MMO required time, effort, budget, resources. So what had to sacrifice there? And I honestly think, in my personal opinion, they made a good choice with what they sacrificed class-wise. They failed horribly at endgame-wise. But, they were balancing something new, which means there was obviously inherent risk there.
And here is the thing. SW Tour was a big project, even in MMO terms. You look at the names behind it, look at the IP, and look at the expectations set just by the existence of Star Wars, the new MMO. And I would have to say, some people will agree with me, some will not, I would not consider SW Tour to be a success. There were some elements in there that were fantastically done. But in terms of the overall MMO experience, certainly at launch, things were lacking. Now, they've added things on as time has gone on, and a number of things have changed and improved. I'm sorry, my chest is still not 100% yet.
I just think you're allergic to me, that's all it is.
So although things have changed and improved, there are still now some and other flaws have perhaps been introduced in the transfer to free-to-play. I'll make no comments about not being allowed to wear epic gear previously earned on a previously subscribed account, but hey.
Congratulations.
Probably one of my biggest pet peeves in any MMO I have ever played, at which point I'm afraid I just logged out again. It does not have perhaps the thriving community that they might have anticipated at this point in time.
Well,
so
they were also dealing with
too much.
That's the thing, anytime someone produces something new, like a brand new idea, okay, I have this great idea for a game where when you actually collect the rats join your team. By the time you reach max level, you actually have millions of minions following behind you. You're no longer playing
Pied Piper Online.
You're no longer playing your character. Instead, you have this overview of your character because you're a mastermind, and you are masterminding your rats to try to attack new players. Let's just go with there's my innovation. There's my story. Yay, congratulations. And yes, it will be called the Pseudo's Pied Piper, the PPP. P cubed, just for fun.
So,
P cubed. But anyway, I'm going to explain a point, and you're all just going to cut me off. Go on, then.
No, carry on.
So we come up with this idea, and the decision has to be made. Is it worth making it or not? Because in the end, one of the things that has to be guaranteed, especially in an MMO, because we require a persistent environment in which to have our gameplay experience, is will it be enough when it is released for us to pay the bills and still make a profit?
Mm-hmm.
That is always what it's going to come down to. Most people don't know what it takes to really produce a game. I mean, we've discussed it on the show and a variety of MMO Buff shows before. Many people played the armchair game developer. Oh, I would have done it this way because this would have been so much better. Oh, I would have done it this way because that would have been so much better. Well, you're wrong. I'm right. Welcome to development. It is not easy. But it is not just the game developers who need to be paid. You have the art teams. You need the project managers, the marketing people. You also need to make certain that you have the community managers taken care of. There are so many people that have to be paid. So the question becomes, is this innovation worth the risk? And when it comes to an MMO, as long as you've got certain things there, for example, you gained experience in Tor, you leveled up. Congratulations. You had classes you could play. You leveled up. Congratulations. There was PvE content. Not as much as people may have wanted, but it was there. Congratulations. That fits a bare bone thing. There was PvP. Not the best that they could have done, but it was still there. You've played the game developer game on Steam, haven't you?
Indeed. I actually consumed that in one night and ended up playing through 2 or 3 times. Very, very good game.
I still play the game, but I very, very, very much so remember one of the things that stands out about that game. When you go to create a new game, you are given 3 choices, and you have to decide how much resource you want to put into each thing, be it the engine itself, be it the level designs, be it the story, and you have to decide where you want that slider to go. So you have to go with give and takes, and some genres care about certain things more than others. And MMOs have those skeletal things. You have your leveling system or some kind of XP gain. You have interactions with people in the world. That is awesome. You don't always have classes because, even if you look at the Secret World has no class system. You have points that you can spend, and you can be whatever you have spent points into. So if you want to be a shotgun-wielding, pistol-toting mercenary, you can do so. If you want to be a blade-wielding flinger of blood, do so. If you want to be a pistol-winging flinger of blood, do so. You have a lot of options in it, and it's just based on where you decide to put your points. You basically pick your class, so to speak. And if you have all your points, you can mix it up and be whatever the heck you want. But anyway, once you have that done, you go to the muscles. Now, the muscles are how you actually implement those things. And I think that is where you were trying to go. And what I was simply going to state in regards to that, building up to it, is the fact that when you start adding the muscles to it, what makes all of these things work together, what makes them pull together so that the bones don't just stand there and be everyone's MMO repetitiveness, it is the application of your risk. That, to me, is what that means. Because the skin is when you make it all pretty and etc. But when you have, like, Tor made a design choice for how they distributed the game that kind of screwed things up. But if you take that away completely and you just look at what was there was innovation in Quest. When you look at WildStar, what is innovative to you? What is, quote unquote, what sets it apart from something like WoW?
So let's just pick
That's
up
the
on
muscle.
one point before I come back to the what's innovative. One thing to take away from Game Developer Tycoon is the fastest way to take a profitable studio and bankrupt it was to start creating an MMO.
Yes.
And I thought that was rather amusing and somewhat on the money, because it's hard, and it's hard to sustain. So, okay, you asked a specific question. WildStar as an example, what's new in questing? And I guess we can expand this to the questing process and MMOs per se. I would argue
pick
WildStar
different skeletal pieces.
Do have a few things that are innovative in questing. I think their concept of tweet quests is quite nice. It gives people a choice about how to consume the text and the detail in the quest content. So for those who don't know, although they deviate from it in places, a lot of time they made an effort to make the initial quest text consumable in the length of a tweet. It was the ballpark they used. So you could at a glance take it in a sentence, click your button, off you go, and you're back killing eradicators or whatever it is, flavor of the month for the zone you're in. But if you wanted more details, then you could click and have a conversation and ask questions and get the whole backstory to yes, well, these augmenters, they're doing this, and this is what we're doing, and this is why we should kill them, because otherwise this happens, and then you die because that one's a prime, you didn't notice when you pull it. But... and I will be prepared to bet there is almost nobody that hasn't done that at least once on their leveling journey in WildStar, even though they're big, red, and flashy, however.
Hey, are you kidding me? Do you know what I hear when I'm running around in WildStar? Ooh, red thing, pull. That's what I hear.
Does depend if you're solo. It can be non-solo. It's a little harder. Or not all primes are created equal.
Why are you playing an MMO solo, Mizpah?
Purely because the person I'm leveling with is off at the bank. And I'm not good at standing still doing nothing. So, a couple of new things there, but let's look at some others. So where else have we seen innovation in questing, or can you even innovate in something as core as questing without taking too much of a risk? Pseudo's nodding, so where are the big innovations in questing?
Okay, first off, when you do quests, even in Tor, when you had quests going through there, there were cutscenes, people were talking to you, and they said, hey, all these horrible things are occurring, go kill 10 of these, or go knock these guys out and kill them, okay? That is your typical questing thing. There are certain types of quests you can do, and that pretty much sums it up. There's only so much you can do. Kill, escort, that kind of a thing. There's only so many different things. However, I honestly believe that there is true innovation in the way that the Secret World does their questing. To start off with, okay, they limit how many quests you can carry at any one time. You have one world story quest that you can follow around and do at any point in time as long as you feel that you can accomplish whatever is being asked of you. You can carry 3 subquests, 1 dungeon quest, and that's pretty much it. And then there's one just core little extra story quest. So you have a limited amount of quests that you can carry. Now, that's one thing. Let me tell you a little bit about what it takes to get a quest in the Secret World, because you haven't played it, so you haven't had a chance to experience it. One of the biggest quests that stands out to me, even to this day, is I walk up to a bonfire that is happening in front of a house. A little old lady is standing there with a shotgun. And when you walk up and you start talking to her, she starts to talk to you about her husband and how all the changes seem to have come when he came back, and how she really wishes she would have talked to him a bit more before things happened, because she could have shared and maybe stopped what was coming. That's all you get from her. She doesn't tell you, go kill this, go collect this, go defend this. She literally tells you what the hell is going on. And then your quest will say on the side, go kill X these, go kill B these. But because of the way that they've given the quest to you, you're not being told it's just the same repetitive style of questing that you've done everywhere else. You are so brought into the story. You're sitting there going, wow, Nana, not only are you awesome because part of the cutscene included her turning around with a shotgun and blowing the head off of a zombie, you see how practical she is. And, you see how she looks at life. And you actually start to go, well, I wonder if one of these things that I've killed is your husband. And it's just the way that it leads you in, but it doesn't say go kill this, go collect this, go escort this. No quest in the secret world does that, ever. They don't do that.
Yet you're describing an appealing, to me, innovative quest system that some people might go, but I just want to click and move on. I don't like that.
You can hit escape. You can hit escape. If you want to hit escape, do so. But then if you take the types of quests that they actually introduced in the secret world, proper puzzles that required you to use Google if you didn't understand the Fibonacci sequence, if you didn't understand how to do base cubing, if you didn't understand certain mathematical functions, if you didn't understand grep, because there are quests that you can actually do grep in. If you don't understand all of these little things, you need Google. In fact, there are sites that literally specifically have the way the whole quest thing.
Yet we're talking about a game, yet again, that's had critical acclaim in many places for certain things, yet is not running around with the highest server pop. So again, have they innovated too far and moved themselves away from the core audience?
Nope. The episode that you missed pre-patches was called Second Chances, because unfortunately you were sick as a bloody dog, and I really do hope you get better soon, because you coughing and stuff really gets in the way. We want you to be able to vocalize your thoughts and opinions. Okay, so in that particular episode, we talked about why would you go back and give another MMO a second chance after a patch or an iteration or a new expansion? Why would you bother? And one of the key things that was brought up when it came to the secret world, when they came out, and Gazimov mentioned this in actually one of our episodes as well, when they came out with their system, their action combat was screwed. It was really, really bad. It was only after they brought out another patch where it fixed it that it completely and dynamically changed the game. But why would somebody want to go back and give an MMO a second chance? And that's something that we had covered in that show. So if you haven't seen that yet, go back and watch Second Chances, because I'm joined by the diametrically opposed bearded duo known as Ulrus and Aussie. And we were discussing that. We even had Gazimov on the show, if I remember correctly, for that one. I can't remember. But when it comes to changes that occur, getting a game out, that's the first step, because then you get the budget to cover extra things. The innovation, to me, is in how they decided to throw it at people. I mean, how many times do you remember in WoW collecting all the quests from one thing and having 30 quests, well, technically 25 because you couldn't get more than that in your quest log, and just going through and doing all 25, not even knowing what the heck you were doing other than kill this. And it just said you needed to collect so many skins and you needed to do so many of this and collect this plant and stuff like that. You didn't care. But in the secret world, you literally had to make choices because you can only have so many quests on you at any one point in time. And it actually made the world feel bigger. But that's that.
Okay. Well,
anyway.
I mean, world feel bigger comes down to lots of things. Screenagers brought up some good points. Apparently GW2, although I'd leveled in it, I actually didn't enjoy the questing experience in that game. Largely because I didn't like the hearts? World. No, that's the bit I hated. I absolutely hated them.
Why?
Because you somehow felt so divorced from what was happening, because someone would be playing alongside you, and it was irrelevant to them if you were there or not. And I really didn't like that aspect. I felt that it actively discouraged social interaction whilst grouping, whilst at the same time just encouraging this herd to run around with no reference to the people either side of them, just all glibly tapping a button and getting the experience. And I don't know, I just really found that not an enjoyable thing.
How often do you request text, Mizpah?
All the time.
Do you really?
Yes, I really do.
So if I go back and I watch your streams of WildStar that you started up this past weekend, you stop and you read every single quest and all the stuff that goes with it.
I will have skipped quests that I've already read in the beta.
Okay.
But I read every quest.
You do realize that some of those changed?
Have changed, yes.
And yet you still didn't go back through and read them?
The ones that have changed, I go click, I see if the wording's changed, I carry on.
All right, I'm just going to go out.
It's one of the reasons why I'm so slow. I actually do read quest text.
I disagree. You're slow because you get lost. Because you think it's supposed to be this way and it's not. And there are actually some quests that are slightly bugged that way, which actually are very confusing. But anyway, moving past that. when it came to Guild Wars 2, one of the things that I really liked about it was the fact that they had an open tagging kind of system for the completion of some quests. Mm-hmm. This comes off the bat that I got sick and tired of the daily grind in a variety of other MMOs where I had to wait for it was my turn to kill the dang boss mod, and I ended up wasting time.
And ironically, I far prefer closed tagging, with the exception of making sure you have open tagging for objectives that otherwise will provide an artificial funnel in a zone. But I think certain things...
Did you play Aeon?
Very, very briefly.
Did you see how the open quest or the open tagging worked in Aeon?
Don't remember it massively well, so I'm going to say no to that. I literally dived in for a couple of evenings and had a go.
Okay, in open world tagging in Aeon, the way it would work is the person who did the most damage won the loot, won the experience, won everything. That was how it started. And it was incredibly, incredibly annoying when it first started because of that. The fact that people allowed open tagging could be termed innovation, because it wasn't there before. It wasn't even viable on the server to be able to actually say, you know, Bob hit this, Fred hit this, John hit this, Mizpah hit it. Congratulations, they're not all in the same group, yet acknowledge the fact that all of them should get something for this. That is to start. Whether it's, you know, you get a certain percentage completed on your quest, like in WildStar, or whether you get a particular percentage of XP, or whether you get all the loot, depending upon, obviously, the implementation of it. So that's the questing side of things, but we keep sticking on the questing, and maybe what we need to do is move to another thing.
Okay, combat.
I'm only saying that because of 10.
Something that's seen many combat, something that's seen a ton of iteration and changes. Difficult to pin down precisely where. I think Terra is probably one of the forerunners in changing out the combat system to an active one. But obviously in MMOs we started with the... me choking. We started with the idea of I have 47 spells, I can access them all at the same time. I'm using spells generically, it might be a kick, a treble backflip, throw a dinner plate, doesn't matter. And I have all these things available to me, and I am just going to have to know all of them, and selectively know when to use what ability. And depending on the class, sometimes I'm only really picking out of a small subset, and this lot over here are just extras. Or sometimes, and this is good in my personal mind, many of these things are viable, and some of them are situational. So you had to have this big level of character knowledge to be optimal. And there I am going, here's my rotation. Here's my priority order. And depending on the complexity or how dynamic it was, gave you the idea of the skill cap for the character. Yet it's moved on. If you're playing Terra, if you're playing WildStar today, if you're sitting there going, 1, 3, 4, 4, 5, oh, I'm dead. Because combat doesn't work like that anymore. Apart from the fact that now many of us pretty much find it essential to use something like this, for that very reason, strongly recommended any mouse with many buttons on it is very good for WildStar.
Actually, it's good for really a lot of games, but many buttons handle it.
All of a sudden, I'm more concerned with where am I standing, how am I moving, and yes, I've made a limited action set, a build out of a small number of spells, and I'm trying to use them reactively and situationally, but it's much more about the dynamic combat feel. I won't say the same as, but it's more akin to an action-type game than it is to solve the mathematical puzzle of what is the optimal DPS rotation.
Well, and that's still built into action gameplay, because in the end you've got to figure out a way to do action, move, and still hit the boss, or nothing dies, you're just moving around in circles.
You've got to do both, but if you have to choose between moving and hitting the boss, or getting 99% rather than 80% damage, but moving perfectly, you're going to pick the lower damage and the better movement, because you're going to be more successful in this game than the other way around.
You heard it here first. Mizpah's just broken the code for action gameplay. Ta-da! No. The thing is, when it comes to action and when it comes to combat, there's only so many things that you can do in an MMO to make it unique. Okay? Action combat is sort of inspired by FPS. It's sort of inspired by the ability, or even TPSs, because third-person shooters also work out as well. You see your character, you're able to run around, you move, you try to avoid spell effects, etc. honestly, that kind of innovation, if you want to call it such, is really only possible due to the types of connections that we have in today's day and age. Could you imagine trying to play WildStar on a 56K modem?
I can imagine it. I probably wouldn't like the experience very much.
No, of course you wouldn't. And in fact, the game at that point in time would fail because the technology has not reached the innovation that is being brought about. Same thing with Guild Wars 2. Trying to play Guild Wars 2 on a very slow connection, when you've got telegraphs going, when you have to move, you have to dodge, you have to jump because you've got moving platforms and there are jumping puzzles and a whole bunch of other stuff that goes with it. It's only because hardware technology is going to certain points where we can actually bring these designs and implementations in.
And a quick side sentence, just before we lose the thread. Jumping puzzles in GW2, innovation or iteration?
I believe that they honestly are in innovation because they're brought into gameplay, iteration because it's something people were doing already with wall hacking and trying to figure out the best way to make something occur. So it's sort of like what Guns did. When they produced Guns 2, they went, we're going to take K-Style, which is a hack that they used in the original Guns, and we're going to implement it into an actual game style. And that's sort of what I believe ended up occurring with jumping puzzles.
I would actually class it as innovation. Yes, it iterates on prior things, but it iterates on Mario, if you look at it that way. The idea of jumping from puzzle to puzzle.
I did say that, though. I said it is an innovation because they brought it into part of the gameplay style, but it is an iteration of something that was already occurring.
I thought that related to Guns, sorry, the wall jumping and hacking.
You don't listen to me.
I listen to you. I'm going to have to replay that back and see why I either missed your point or perhaps one of us either wasn't listening or maybe not quite as clear. But yes, Guns... wall hacking, absolutely, it created a new gameplay style, but that's a different sort of divergence. But the level of the impact to the player, the choices you had to play, the whole play styles that emerged around it, how quickly can I get from A to B? I would call that innovation. But it's a good example why, if you look at it in terms of how different, at some point it's iteration, and at some point it goes past the mark where you start to think of it as innovation. And I think that's a good example as to why these things are so difficult to define.
Well, see, I would throw out there that something is an iteration if there's already some kind of built-in mechanic for it, and all they're doing is just modifying it ever so slightly. I would call it an innovation if they're willing to invest development time to figure out how to get it right and make it a part of requirement for play. And make it a part of, basically making it a part of the actual game itself.
I struggle with requirement for play because there are people that don't touch jumping puzzles. They hate them.
And yet, in WildStar, you are required to do various jumping puzzles in order to actually successfully complete quests. So no, you are still forced to do it as part of the game. You can not accept the quest if you want. You cannot accept the quest if you want, but it is still in the game as part of the core mechanic for how you complete certain objectives.
Yes, there is a level 25-ish quest in Westvale, that has you jumping up this Elden thing that I won't spoil the story with for people. And actually, I love it.
You don't have to. There is a jetpack.
Yes, but it's less fun. One thing I haven't seen and I'd love to see would be jumping puzzles on the scope, scale, size, and sort of contextual relationship to the game in other games that are in Guild Wars. That, to me, is the singular standout feature of GW2.
You don't play platformers.
Puzzles. Used to play platformers. Haven't played them for years.
Okay. So what you're talking about is more in an MMO sort of thing than anything else.
Yes. I mean,
it's the MMO you want to see this particular thing in.
I would love it if the GW2 jumping puzzles were on the similar or even larger scale found, for example, in WildStar or in the expansion for Warcraft. I doubt that would fit. But I really do like that. I just found it fun, innovative, challenging, break from the norm. There you go.
Okay. Basically, to me, what it comes down to is everything is an iteration of something. Innovation, to me, is when, and I have to put it in this terminology, because It's going to be different based on your experiences. Innovation is when you run across something that you've never seen before and you go, that's an awesome idea.
Never
And it is so difficult to find that in today's day and age when it comes to an MMO and still have the rest of the MMO. Because we can sit here and go, did Star Wars take it too far? Did the Secret World take it too far? Did WildStar go too far? Is World of Warcraft failing? We could get into that debate, but in all honesty, it makes no difference what risk they take in one area, because an MMO requires all pieces of that MMO to somehow weave together, and if one thing fails, even if it's not the thing that they're risking on, let's just say that the questing experience in Tor was absolutely bang on. If they still failed in the PvE and the PvP department, you're screwed, because you have just risked. Your risk is not going to get any benefit. The other stuff will kill it. There is too much interweaving when it comes to an MMO.
I see where you're driving at, and I do see the principle. I think depending upon the weighting you have of the tenets of gameplay in your MMO, you can afford, perhaps, to be less polished, less able in some arenas, depending on if that's how you're promoting your game. Let's say the PvP was relatively basic and didn't push all the buttons for people, but you've never really promoted your game as being a full-on hardcore PvP experience. You've promoted it as being a PvE sweet shop, and it's amazing. It's got the best dungeons, the most amazing raids, and the core of your player base is there for that PvE experience. Then not being as polished in PvP perhaps isn't going to hurt you that much.
No. I'm simply saying is, to make an MMO an MMO, you have so many parts to it.
Yeah.
Everything from the story to how the talents are set up, to how the characters are designed, to how the story is designed, how the world is designed, the way that they decide to implement PvP, the way they decide to implement PvE, how they do the questing environments, what they bring in. All of that literally feeds together to create the experience. And even if you are incredibly successful with the one thing that you are innovative on, because I agree, when it comes to innovation, you can really only play around with one, maybe two things in an MMO, or you have completely basically thrown yourself out into the deep end and you're probably not going to get very well known. But if you do that, if the rest of the stuff, or even a couple of things, fail, it can destroy that chance for the game, and it's not necessarily going to be failing because of the innovation. It'll be failing because some of the other parts are not as polished as they should be. Yes, part of it could be a marketing issue because someone may have decided to market the game in a different way than it's meant to be. Yes, something could have been done in the style that somebody made a big hubbub about a game that's supposed to go a certain way, and people compare it to other games going, there's nothing new about it at all. In fact, it's horrible because the reflection that you see is not really what's behind you in game. No offense, Watch Dogs. So, we have those kinds of things. But my point is, when it comes to the MMO genre, when it comes to trying to be innovative in MMOs, we have to be aware of the fact that sometimes what was innovated or what was special about that MMO can be completely left in the dark because of certain other aspects of the game that failed. And I want people to remember that, because one of the things we discussed about in Second Chances is sometimes they're able to bring those things back up to polish, like the Secret World did with the way its action combat went. They were able to polish that up. It makes the game a completely different thing. But most people aren't going to realize what a classless system really is like in that style, or the way their quests are given out, because they're not going to give it a second chance. But do keep in mind that when it comes to the MMO, too many puzzle pieces, all it takes is a couple of them to fail, and people will not see the picture or the new thing. And it doesn't necessarily mean what they've risked is why it's failing.
And this leads probably to one final point that is interesting.
Mm-hmm. That was my final point.
And that is that if you listen to the voices of players, first of all, you have to have a magic wand, because you need to understand what is the difference between the vocal minority and the silent majority. It's cliche, but it's got to be very, very difficult to receive that information and analyze it effectively. Not a simple task, which means that if you do everything that players say they want, the chances are you're not going to have a recipe for success. Because if it were that simple, there'd be many games out there with much bigger subs, or perhaps a more level playing field in terms of MMO subs. But we still, even though it's not in its quote-unquote glory days, 7.7 million active subs, I do believe, on WoW at the moment. That number's probably only going to go up when Draenor comes out. And this is the game people like to remind us has failed.
See, that's the thing. I don't think it's failed. Although at some point, did you guys, by the way, tackle the question of apathy versus new content in the last forecast? I didn't get a chance to watch it because I was in bed sick.
Nope, we bounce around a few things, but we're going to wait till there's some more information publicly available before we go into some of those bits.
Okay, well, because the reality is, nothing is really failing. WoW is still here. They wouldn't be bringing out an expansion if there wasn't a success. Some people debate that this is going to be the last WoW. Some people think that their innovations are dead. There's nothing new they could do, that it's just, the rinse, repeat, and it's boring. You won't know till you see what changes they've decided to make, etc. Give it a fair shot. Give everything a fair shot. My opinion, buy everything, play everything, and then play the one that you really enjoy the most and give that one your money. Ta-da!
Absolutely.
But that's not really going to happen. That's not realistic in the slightest. Yes.
So I think we've drawn ourselves to a conclusion and to a summary. You can innovate, but innovation is of less import than constant iteration and polish across every aspect of a game. You're going to want the majority of your game systems to feel polished and be considered best of breed for the point in time in which you put out your MMO. And if on top of that, you can have one or two areas where you can genuinely say, hey, we've really innovated here, this is good stuff, then you're in a good place. If you've got one fantastic piece of innovation, but some of your game systems still come from 2005, you're probably not as ready to hit the market running. Innovation, it's fantastic, but what players actually want is a polished, fun game.
See, I would absolutely agree with that. I would be perfectly fine playing something that it is a quote-unquote clone of something else as long as what was presented to me is polished. I am perfectly okay with that. This does not mean I do not want innovation. It just means that I would be okay saying this is a good game because they have polished content. I would just state it just brings nothing new to the table.
And on that note, I'm going to agree with Gothic Slicer's comment in the chat. I'm going to be very upset if WoW ever completes, quote unquote, before we see the Emerald Dream. I don't think that'll happen. However,
you also, I do need to take this one moment to go over things that are coming up, if that is okay.
Yes, let's do that, and then we'll say our goodbyes.
Absolutely. First off, Screenager, I'm very sorry that you've actually agreed with Mizpah. It happens on occasion, and for that, I do apologize. I can get you some group therapy afterwards.
Corrupting influence.
You are a corrupting influence, Mizpah. You know that, though. But yes, so we have a couple of things coming up, my friends, in this upcoming week, and it is important for you to be aware of them because there are some crazy, crazy things going on. To start off with, on this Tuesday, we do not have a guest joining us, and there's a reason for it. We've just recently had a release of a game, and the way that they've chosen to do the release has severely impacted the community in some very not so pleasant ways. And what we're going to be doing is spending some time to offer advice and suggestions on how to keep your community strong, your guild strong, even if a developer's choices kind of make it almost impossible or incredibly difficult to do so. So that's what we're going to be covering in the campfire tomorrow with Blank Space and Screenager and myself. Wednesday, we have the Blizzard forecast returning, and we've got Parv, Blank Space, Trollden, Marsh, myself, and Mizpah. Can't forget him, because he's like all over the place on that show. And we'll be discussing, again, Blizzard's IPs, a variety of them. Perhaps we'll actually watch them fail in yet another game of HOTS.
One day we'll win live on stream. We win off stream all the time, honest.
Of course you do. I so believe you and completely and utterly believe you. In fact, I believe you so much, I'm going to give you a piñata.
Why, thank you.
You're very, very welcome. Right, and then on Thursday, we don't have a specific guest prepped just yet for that show because we have a couple who want to be in and we're like, but we need to make room for all of you so we can discuss all the game developer topics. We are going to be having more discussions. Basically, the data mine is literally one giant bit of group therapy and advice for game developers, by game developers, with game developers, and a variety of other utilities. For example, we have Dr. Joe Twist from Yuki.info, one of the advocacy groups that actually fights and helps legally and get rules across, including tax breaks for people in the United Kingdom who are developers. On top of that, Friday, we come back to Cosmotronic. We're going to be doing a post-launch mortem on Cosmotronic. It's going to be rather interesting as we look back at WildStar and go, well, we've been doing this for a while, and now it's out. Now what? And we'll also be presenting to you an idea of the changes that will be coming to Cosmotronic, because the show is going to be changing ever so slightly. Then on Saturday, last week, we had severe technical difficulties. Computers crashed, systems went down, internets stopped working, and we were unable to bring to you the Top Draw Battle for Gia Part 3. That is going to happen this weekend. Be prepared for that. Marsh and I have many things to share, including a very special message from the developers from us, to us. And also, we have a message for them. There's some crazy things happening on Saturday, so you're going to want to watch that. And then, obviously, on Monday, oddly enough, Mizpah and I are back.
Dum, dum, dum.
Now, the topic of next week's show is going to vary because we may or may not have a very specific guest that will be joining us. I'm not going to mention who, but there is an incredibly good case that we will have somebody joining us to discuss some things, and at which point in time, it'll be great because it won't just be me arguing with Mizpah and telling him he's wrong, and Mizpah sitting there telling me I'm wrong, because it kind of goes both ways. Team Pseudo.
Because I'll be able to inveigle someone else to my particular way of thinking, and then there'll be two of us.
Mizpah, I know how much you really, really want the rest of the world to agree with you, but I want you to understand that there are people out there with souls, and they'll follow me. No offense. Okay. See, actually, I need to make this incredibly clear to people. Mizpah and I literally poke fun at each other all the time, and he takes an insane amount of the butt of so many jokes. I want people to understand he is actually intelligent. I am just picking on him, and he is smart. Even though most people will just immediately take my side on anything, because it's great to defy
But
Mizpah.
it's all right. I can work on that.
You can. It's okay, Mizpah. When you find the time, you let me know. We'll guide you to the correct way of thinking. No,
Absolutely.
Seriously. It's an absolute joy to actually debate up against him, because he'll pull something out of the bag and you just go, no, it's this. And he goes, well, but I'm like, shut up, I'm right. And it's kind of funny.
I always found in arguments, shut up, I'm right, perhaps is not the most defining quality of a winning debate.
No, actually, it's not. However, I have had to shush you before so that I can get a point across, because you don't let me finish my points.
It's tactical.
But yes, it is tactical, but it also shows that I was so close to proving you wrong that you're like, oh my gosh, I got to put away now.
Something like that.
Wow. And yes, welcome to Team Beatbox, because we do that.
Okay. So on that note, I think it's time to do some goodbyes and perhaps drop into a little bit of post-show and see if people want to throw out some ideas of where they've seen an innovation from or iteration in MMOs.
And yes, Gothic Slicer, go ahead and bring us your suggestions, what it is you guys want us to tackle. We're making small changes to all of our shows across the board so that people are aware. We're going to look at having more and more guests onto the Monday show, mainly because there are going to be Mondays where I'm going to want to take a day off, and there are going to be Mondays where Mizpah wants to take a day off. And having guests come on to discuss a variety of topics is something that we like to do, including developers.
So, hold on to those herrings we spoke about earlier. Time to say some quick goodbyes. We'll be back to discuss a few little things off air. Well, on air, but off YouTube. Catch you soon. This has been episode 31, 32, 31.
32! Oh, wow.
That's right, I can cut that bit later. MMOBuff.TV.
You're going to cut the bit.
And I know that's now so going to be in the quick bite for later. Anyway.
No.
This is Mizpah, signing off episode 32 of MMOBuff.TV.